Study objective 3 is where we assign manufacturing costs to work in process. Okay, so the job is starting, and they're going to move costs into work in process. So what we do is we have source documents that show us how, or the amounts by which to make these entries. And we're also going to use something called a job cost sheet. For every job that we do, we're going to accumulate all of our costs in this cost sheet. So you can see there's a date that we add costs, so there will be a bunch of dates we list here. And then materials, labor, and overhead costs get added to the job cost sheet in these boxes, and then all of the costs get added up to get a total cost of the job. And we have a number of units up here in the quantity section. So if we're making 100 TVs and it ends up costing us $1,000, then we know that each TV costs us $10 to make. Bad example, but that's how the job cost sheet works. So let's look at materials first and how to assign raw materials to jobs. This will come via a source document called a materials requisition slip. So factory workers on the job will need to get materials to put into whatever they're making. So they'll fill out this requisition slip, and it goes to the person who's in charge of keeping track of the inventory. And that'll have on there what the worker needs. So 200 handles in this case. It'll have what the cost per unit is and the total cost of the materials being requisitioned into production. And you see a bunch of people sign off on that transfer. So when that requisition slip is filled out, accountants can make the journal entry to move those costs out of raw materials inventory. You see, raw materials inventory is being credited or reduced, and into work in process inventory and into overhead. Now this is a tricky part of this situation, because we learned about direct materials and indirect materials in chapter 14, and this is where it really comes into play. Direct materials that show up, that are major components of a product, will get debited right into WIP inventory. But indirect materials, they can't be traced directly to jobs because it's too impractical to do that. So we will put material costs that are indirect, and like glue and nails and staples and things you can't track specifically to a job in terms of a cost, and we'll put those costs into overhead, and we'll apply some overhead costs to jobs later on. Okay, so direct materials go into WIP directly, and indirect materials go into overhead. So you can see this is where we put costs into work in process, and this is how those costs go out then into the specific jobs that we're working on. Notice there's a cost sheet for every job that we're working on. There's job 101, job 102, and job 103. I'll talk about factory labor costs on the next video.